second part of this demonstration, we'll move our portrait over to a new document and then begin to layer different images over top of our portrait. So first, I want to check how big this is. And I probably should have done this at the beginning of demo number 1, but there's no time like the present. I'm going to go to image size. And we always want to think about, give ourselves the possibility of printing this later. So print resolution is 300 pixels per inch. Width and height I want to keep between 8 and 10 or so, because that's how large I'm going to make my document, or my new document. You'll see that the width and height are locked to keep proportions. That's great. So I'm just going to change the width, let's say to about 10. Let's change the width to 12, and then the height to 8. I'm going to say OK. And we didn't change a whole lot here since we kind of downed the size and upped the resolution. So now I'm going to make a new document to drag and drop this one over onto. I'm going to File, and then I'm going to say New. And my width, 14 inches, height, 11 inches. That's great. That's a little bit larger than what we resized this. So it'll fit nicely. My resolution at 300, I'm giving myself the option to print, and the resolution matches the document that I just resized. Color mode, we definitely want RGB or CMYK. CMYK works a little bit better for printing. So I'll say OK. Now I have my new document. Click and drag that off so I can see my girl. And I'll click and drag her over, making sure that I've selected the layer with the layer mask. Click and drag her and her layer mask over and onto my new document. At this point, I see a couple of flaws in my selection process. I see that the Refine Edge tool selected this area right here. I'm going to go onto my layer mask and minimize this onto my layer mask, and then I'm going to choose black to erase. Use my brush tool. Bump the opacity up to 100%. And on my layer mask, let's go ahead and erase that so it looks just a little bit more believable. I have a soft brush, normal brush, and I can just briefly fix that up. If that was a problem for you, you can follow those steps. If not, don't worry about it. We'll get back to what we were originally planning on doing here. You can click and move this lady by selecting the layer all around the canvas. And keep in mind, you can always crop and recrop this, so where you put it right now isn't where you need to put your subject matter forever. Next thing I'm going to do is click and click and drag an image on top of my portrait layer so that I can begin to use blend modes to be able to see both the features of the portrait model and features of whatever else I decided to choose. We'll File, Open, and I'm going to open a forest. I'm also going to open the city. Okay, I'm going to start with my city, and first I'm going to look at how big it is and make sure that it's around the same size, so it's just easier to drag over. We want the resolution to be 300, and then the width, this is bigger than what I sized my document. I think I sized it to like 11 by 14, so I'm going to type in 12, and 9 is just a little bit smaller than my document. Click so that I can see both of them, and then click and drag the city on top of the girl. For right now, I'm going to drop the opacity down a little bit. There's more kind of strategic and creative ways to play around with seeing both of the images that isn't opacity, but for right now, before we get to that, I'm just going to drop the opacity. And keep in mind, you can always transform or rotate these images. So let's say I really like these lines right here. I'm going to Control T to make the bounding box around my layer 1 or my city. And I'm going to rotate, and then I'm also going to make this larger, so I'm going to hold down Shift to keep the proportions, click and drag, and maybe I want these lines to kind of start up here and then go down. I'll double click here, and if this doesn't seem like enough room to, so now that I've repositioned, rotated, resized my city layer, I'm going to name it. Also going to take the time to name this portrait. With double exposures, in my experience, oftentimes I get a ton of layers before I know it, so it's always kind of nice to stay organized. And we could copy this selection up here and hit inverse and delete, but an easier way to do this is to click on the city layer and then hold down Alt, which is right to the left of your space bar, and then you will see this icon pop up right here. It's that little white box with the arrow. And when I click this, it's going to snap all of the visual information in my city layer onto my portrait layer and get rid of the rest. So because we made this selection right here and we have this layer mask, snapping the city to this layer will only keep the city in the areas that are white on my layer mask. And the nice thing about this is I can still click and then move the contents of my city around to get this just right. I can do this to a second layer if I want to. If I want to make this a little bit more complex, I can go to my forest and repeat the steps. Image, image size. I'm going to change this to 300 and change the width. 11 and 7 is okay. Making it roughly the same size, and then we're going to click and drag the forest over, and Photoshop automatically did this syncing thing right here, which is good. That's what we wanted it to do. So we're going to say Control T. I want to make the forest a little bit bigger. Maybe where's her shirt layer? About right there. So I want to line up the horizon line with where her shirt kind of meets her shoulders and neck. It's just a preference. I'm going to double click this here, and I'm also going to just drop the opacity to see what it's going to look like. Now from here, we can manipulate the blending modes of each of these layers. So for the portrait one, I'm just going to leave that since it's the bottommost layer, and I'm going to uncheck my forest layer in all capital letters naturally. I'm going to click my city layer, and up here, so to the top left of your layers panel, these are called the blending modes. And if you want to know specifically what each group does, you can learn by trial and error, or you can look them up online. If you're in my class, let me know, and I have a really good book on it. So just go ahead and click one and let go, and then if you use your up and down arrow keys, you can kind of move through each one of them without having to go up and double click. And I'm going to bring the opacity back up again so that I can see these kind of in their full color dodge, their full effect. I'm just going to find one that I think is really cool. And keep in mind, if you like what it does in some areas but not others, that's okay. I'm going to talk more about layer masks in the next tutorial and how you can use them to further manipulate and control the effects that you're seeing here. So let's say, you know, I really like this right here, but I don't really like it on her face. It's not a big deal. I'm just going to leave it for now. I'm going to click on the forest, click on the eyeball. I'm going to bring the opacity back up. You can always drop it again, but then just go through these blending modes to see if I really like anything in particular. I really like this, but let's say I don't want it on her face as much. That's okay. I'm going to choose that, so we have overlay here, and then for the city we have lighten, which are two of my favorite blending modes. The last thing in this demo I'm going to do is I'm going to add a background. And I'm just going to add a layer down here that kind of tells Photoshop, hey, stop doing this up here, syncing my layers automatically. And I'm going to choose the forest again, but I'm going to manipulate it in a different way. And click this over, and yep, this appears behind like I wanted it to. I'm just going to delete this layer. Background in all caps. I'm going to Control T this with it selected. Control T, hold down Shift. Double click. Now let's say I don't necessarily like this because I want to differentiate it from the forest that's going on within her face. And there's a few things that you can do, and it kind of goes back to the first few units that we had on Photoshop. I'm going to go to Image, Adjustments, and let's say I want to drop the saturation. I just go Hue Saturation for this layer, and I'm going to drop the saturation here to make it kind of like more vintagey, for lack of a better word. I could manipulate the brightness and the contrast. I'm going to blur it too, so you can go to Filter, or you can choose any of these different effects from the filter gallery. So you could choose really anything. I'm going to do blur, Gaussian blur. I kind of bump that up so it indicates a forest without really being as in-depth and as detailed as this, because I want people to still focus on the foreground, what's going on in my model. Now that I have this, I like that a lot better. Okay, I'm going to crop the whole thing, and let's just figure out, I'll center her about right there. And I'm going to double click. And if I don't like that, I can go Control Z. Wait for my computer to unfreeze. There we go. I'm going to say cancel, and then I can begin to crop this again. Maybe something more like that. Double click, and there we have it. In the next and final tutorial, I will talk about layer masks and how we can use those to really gain a fuller understanding of what's going on within our layers and within our blending modes, and then we can be able to control it.